Pokemon Scarlet and Violet were highly anticipated games that came out only 10 months after the previous Pokemon game, Pokemon Legends Arceus, released. Some Pokemon fans have been skeptical of Pokemon over the last few main series releases, but what about Pokemon Scarlet and Violet? Today, we'll be discussing Pokemon Scarlet and Violet while avoiding any major story spoilers, talk about if they're worth getting, and if they're really as bad as some people are saying online. Leave a like and subscribe if you want to support the channel, and to give a brief overview of these games, they take place in the PaPaSea region based off of real-world Spain, and have pretty much what you would expect from a new Pokemon game, being some new Pokemon, some regional forms, an evil team, and an overall plot with some weird convoluted story and some battling gimmick. What makes Scarlet and Violet unique is that each of these stories are broken up into 3 separate parts that you can do at your own pace. There's the Victory Road story that involves collecting all 8 gym badges, becoming the champion, battling your rival Nemona, one of the best rivals in a modern Pokemon game in my opinion. Then there's the Path of Legend, which follows the lore and history of the region, where you're accompanied by Arven, which feels a bit like you're playing against the bosses in Pokemon Legends Arceus or battling totem Pokemon in Sun and Moon. Then there's Starfall Street that follows the story of Team Star and Penny, Team Star being the evil team of this game, consisting of a bunch of misfits from the school who banded together. You can do pretty much anything you want in any order, which is great too. Now, there is no level scaling between all of these, so you could technically battle the 8th gym leader first and struggle against their high level Pokemon if you really wanted to, or you can explore around and fight different Team Star bases or explore with Arven. Talking to Nurse Joy will let you know what is recommended to do next, although she usually says the wrong suggestion. I've heard she just suggests whatever's nearby. So while I played through Scarlet and Violet, I just followed a map that showed the intended order to do everything, at least the order that everything was in terms of levels. While many people would have preferred level scaling to make it so you can truly do anything you want in any order, that would mess up some teams that some gym leaders would have, since part of the challenge for some of these trainers that you battle is them having fully evolved Pokemon or having a Pokemon with a certain moveset, and scaling would completely eliminate the ability to be under-leveled or over-leveled, which would also skew the difficulty a bit. I guess they could technically just have a few different teams depending on what level you are for each NPC battle, or they could just scale your Pokemon up to their levels. But I think what we got was a pretty good for Game Freak's first attempt at a proper open world game, as Legends Arceus wasn't exactly open world, although it definitely could have been better executed. And before you call me a Game Freak apologist in the comments, we'll talk about some negatives in this video too later on. There's some new Pokemon too, a little bit over 100, some of which I still haven't seen yet. And while this is mostly opinion based, I really like the new Pokemon added in this game, especially more than the new Pokemon added in Pokemon Sun and Moon or Pokemon Sword and Shield previously. It seems like they got more creative with the Pokemon they added this time, with additions like Knackle, a mushroom salt rock, Palafin, which turns into Superman, then Flamiga, which is literally a flamingo. I kept seeing cool Pokemon that I wanted to use on my team while playing through this game for the first time, which made exploring a lot more fun, something that has been missing from more recent Pokemon games. It feels like the recent releases of Pokemon games, more specifically Sun and Moon and Sword and Shield, are rather linear with their routes and how you explore them, with many of them just being literal straight lines, more so in Sun and Moon, with little exploration, unlike in previous Pokemon games like say Ruby and Sapphire or Diamond and Pearl, which feel a bit more open and have a bit more exploration with optional areas to explore, which really help build up the world. With Scarlet and Violet, we don't see the exact same thing as those older Pokemon games, but we do have a much more open world to explore that isn't linear, and unlike in Legends Arceus, there's also actual cities in this region and buildings to make the world feel a bit more full, and you can walk to each different area instead of having to rely on your map to fast travel like in Legends Arceus. This is a big improvement in my opinion, as a lot of the time I spent on my first playthrough of Scarlet and Violet was just exploring all these various areas, wandering into Team Star bases in other areas, and doing Terra raids. These Terra raids function very similar to the raids we saw in Pokemon Sword and Shield, except they can be found all over the world and aren't just limited to the wild area or DLC area like they were in Sword and Shield. These make them a lot more accessible while playing through the story, and allowed me to collect a lot of useful items and EXP candies to help level up while going through the main story. In terms of Terastallization in general, this generation's gimmick, it wasn't really fully explained in the story too well, and it also doesn't really tie in with legendary Pokemon in this game like Dynamaxing did in Sword and Shield with Eternatus, but it's kind of like a toned down version of Dynamaxing where a Pokemon can change their type to one of these Terra types, then get an extra stab boost for using a move of that type, but it doesn't power up all of that Pokemon's moves like Dynamaxing did. This can be used to completely change a Pokemon's type too. For example, in the game you are given a gift Pikachu if you get the game before I think the end of February, and while Pikachu is normally an electric type Pokemon, it has the Terra type of flying, so that can be used to dodge earthquakes, which can be really cool in competitive battling. I haven't really had a chance to mess around with competitive battling or online battlings at all yet, but the battle timer being only 20 minutes long is back. This means that a lot of your 6v6 battles will just end in time, which isn't much of an issue while playing through the core game, but if you're a competitive battler or somebody who just likes battling online, this is a real bummer since 20 minutes a lot of the times just isn't enough. I don't understand why they don't make it variable and have it so you can set it for as long as you want or as quick as you want. The rest of the online functionality was pretty good though, when it worked. Many online Terra raids that you can join with random other players would just fail to connect, and you would have to wait to refresh the page to see newer raids. Even if none of the raids were joinable anymore, you still had to wait. It was rather frustrating, but staples such as Surprise Trade, formerly known as Wonder Trade, and trading with a link code returned, which is rather nice. Another cool online feature they added was the ability to basically join other people's worlds. I'll talk about this more later, but this is a great way of getting version exclusive Pokemon or just showing off your new Pokemon to a friend. I think this feature has a lot of possibilities that can only get better over time, and I think there's a lot with this. And now, the big one, let's talk about Pokemon Scarlet and Violet's performance on the Switch. To put it simply, it's not great. There are many instances where the game will just drop frames, some Pokemon and characters will move like a slideshow if they're more than 10 feet away from you, and you might experience some crashes. I've heard mixed things about crashes, as most people seem to have had only a small amount of crashes or none at all, but other people have been saying that their game is constantly crashing for them, which can be very frustrating. This could be caused from a wide variety of reasons, whether it's the Switch itself, the way the game is made, or possibly how some people just take care of their Switch. But the bottom line is these issues shouldn't be as noticeable as they are, and the crashes should definitely be minimalized more than they already are. It doesn't exactly take away from the overall gameplay, however, but even if you are a more casual Pokemon fan or a more casual gamer, even if you don't really care about the technical side of video games, you will notice the game's weird performance. On the bright side though, while the lack of polish is far from ideal and should have been addressed ahead of release, the game itself in terms of the story, what you can do in the game, and how you can adventure throughout it, still feel rather complete to me. What I mean by that is if you were to look at a Pokemon game like Sword and Shield for example, while the graphics weren't stellar on that game either, the performance was fine, and it didn't have nearly as many issues as Scarlet and Violet when it comes to performance. However, Pokemon Sword and Shield felt more bare when it comes to the content you can do while playing the actual game. There wasn't much of a post-game in Sword and Shield, and the whole Evil Team and Macro Cosmos arc felt a bit rushed and unexplored, while Scarlet and Violet had a lot more to do compared to Sword and Shield, at the expense of a less optimal performance. For example, the first time I played Sword and Shield, I beat it in about 13 or 14 hours, while my first playthrough of Scarlet and Violet took 20 hours and I thought I was rushing through it. While I'd obviously prefer to have it both ways, a game that has good performance and a lot of content, and there really isn't much of an excuse as to why we can't have it that way, I'll take performance hiccups in a game that feels full of content rather than a smoother running game that feels like it has less content overall. We don't really know the exact cause for these issues. I've heard a lot of rumors and speculation as to why the game performs the way it does. It could be from a very wide array of factors. But at the very least, I think that if you look at the last few Pokemon games released, mainly Legends Arceus and Scarlet and Violet, it does seem like Game Freak is listening and heading in the right direction again, albeit at a slower pace. Now, in terms of the content and features in Scarlet and Violet, there's quite a lot in it to add a lot of replayability to this game to pour countless hours into. First, we have the 3 separate stories you can do as we discussed earlier, offering 3 unique experiences. Then there's a few smaller features or mechanics added, like sandwiches. Every Pokemon game has to have their own weird unique food for some reason, which can help with breeding Pokemon or catching Pokemon or training Pokemon. You can find shops all across the region to get sandwich ingredients to craft the perfect sandwich for your team, and you can even buy pre-made sandwiches among some other food that have a similar effect to the sandwiches, or just make sandwiches in your picnic. The picnic allows you to interact with your party Pokemon similar to the camp in Pokemon Sword and Shield. This time though, you breed your Pokemon by going into the picnic, and any egg that is laid by your Pokemon goes in this basket and then goes right into your PC from there. This does allow you to stockpile a lot of eggs a bit easier than previous Pokemon games, but it is annoying that you have to hatch all those eggs you then store in your PC, and it's a lot easier to have more leftover eggs, and leftover eggs while breeding is just annoying to deal with. I personally prefer the older daycare method when it comes to hatching Pokemon, where you just have one Pokemon with Flame Body, then fill out the rest of your party with eggs, mainly because that method features a lot less leftover eggs. But I have heard that others prefer this new method, and I don't really breed that much anyway, so I won't use it that much personally. Another neat mechanic to help with leveling up is auto-battling. This is similar to what we saw in Pokemon Legends Arceus, where you can send out a Pokemon while you're journeying across the region and it'll just battle for you, as long as you don't get too far away from it. There were also some times where I would send out my Pokemon and it just wouldn't battle a Pokemon that was right in front of it. This is useful in some situations, but it's far from perfect. First, you get far less XP from auto-battling this way, which is somewhat understandable, but it makes it practically worthless once you reach the later portion of the game since the XP you get is so low. On top of that, Pokemon won't evolve if they leveled up from an auto battle, and they won't learn new moves either. The latter isn't too much of an issue since you can just relearn your old moves by going into your party's summary and then just teach them from there. But not being able to manually evolve your Pokemon from your party like you did in Legends Arceus feels a bit backwards. Overall, it's still a cool feature that is worth using, especially in the early game when you're first starting out, but it's in need of some improvement still. Maybe if it returns in a future game it'll be better, but at the very least it's still a cool new feature. Now these next complaints, if you want to call them that, probably don't affect most players. It's more so things that make creating content or doing challenges on this run a bit more annoying. First, for Nuzlocke challenges, there's a few limitations. If you're doing a hardcore variant, you can switch your battle style to set to make it so you don't get a free option to switch after each KO. So you have to just click no every time a new Pokemon would be sent out by an NPC. It's not a huge deal, just annoying, especially considering that this has been in literally every other Pokemon game, so why is it not in this one? You also can't turn off battle animations, which was nice to cut down on some time while grinding and was commonly used in speedruns for faster times. This was also in every other Pokemon game since Red and Blue, so it's really strange to see it just absent here. And last, the co-op, if that's what you really want to call it, is rather limited. While going to other people's worlds and catching their version-exclusive Pokemon is great, there really isn't that much you can do together aside from battle, trade, or run around and catch Pokemon together, but you don't even need to go to other people's worlds to battle and trade in the first place. When this feature was first revealed, I was hoping that the co-op would work more similarly to the local co-op we saw in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, where it made every battle a double battle so you and a friend can even do all of the gym battles together and truly play the game together. This would have been so much more fun for co-op playthroughs of this game, especially after having it in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee and not even be able to use it online, which really limited that game's use of that feature. And that's pretty much everything I wanted to say about Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. So in conclusion, despite their flaws and these complaints I have on them, I feel like this video was more negative than positive now that I read it out loud. They're still really fun games that I enjoy a ton and love playing. If you're a Pokemon fan who has at least somewhat enjoyed the last few releases, I'm sure you'll like these games too. But if you're the type of person who watches Pokemon videos online and made it to this far in the video, then you probably already made your decision anyway. If not, and you're say a returning fan who hasn't played Pokemon in the last few generations, then you might be in for a shock with how different this new game is from what you're used to, but with the 3 different paths to follow, chances are you'll find something in it you'll enjoy. Now, if you didn't like the last few releases of Pokemon games and constantly hate on Pokemon games saying how the older games are better, then you probably won't like this game either if you're going into it like that, and will just be better off playing the older Pokemon games you enjoy or new games entirely. But in the end, I think that Scarlet and Violet are a step in the right direction, and we can only go up from here. Hopefully.